Welcome back everyone. The quote-unquote Big 3 or maybe Big 4 era might be back. Following the Phoenix Suns acquiring Bradley Beal, they have now collected a group of Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, and then DeAndre Ayton, with him really being the wild card here. But now the question is, how good can they be? We all know they added a lot of star power and offense, but did they prioritize too much offense and then lose defense and depth? That will really be the question that needs to be answered.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some superstars like Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and then even DeAndre Ayton these days. This team, this Phoenix Suns team, really kind of went crazy this offseason, and not really a gamble, but they're looking to win big right now. And I think that when you look at all, I guess, championship teams recently, you kind of see a formula of some really good young guys, some veterans. Obviously, you need that on any team, but it looks like the Suns are kind of building that around what they got right now. Like I said, this is probably the most lethal shooting team in the NBA right now, I'd say, at least in terms of starting lineups. And with the rest of the roster, you know, with Cameron Payne, they're expected to bring back Okogie, Biyombo, Bates Diop, Jordan Goodwin, and then the pickup of Eric Gordon too, which in my opinion was huge. The Suns are looking pretty deadly, honestly, and make a pretty good championship run.
Yeah, I definitely agree. They did really well with the limited money they had in free agency. They had nothing more than veteran minimum contracts to offer, and like you referred to with Eric Gordon, they got him for one, they got Keita Bates-Diop for one, they got Damian Lee, they brought him back anyway, they got Drew Eubanks, Yuta Watanabe, Chimezie Metu, quite a few, and they're all quality role players, with that especially being true for Eric Gordon and Yuta Watanabe. But then again, they had to do that because they have 80% of their cap tied to KD, Booker, Beal, and DeAndre Ayton. That's a lot. That's more than any other team in the NBA has committed to 4 players alone. How much can they rely on minimum contract guys? Kind of my thought process here.
Well, you talk about the financial side of it. So between Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, DeAndre Ayton, the Suns next year will be spending, I think it was upwards of around $150 million for these guys. And that's more than a lot of teams have total for their whole roster. And it's honestly just insane. But you look at a lot of these contracts that they snagged up, and they completely did. Like I said, with Eric Gordon, and to your point, complete snag for that price. You look at, I don't know, that had to have been maybe 10 years ago. Eric Gordon really wanted to go to the Suns. He said he wanted to be a Phoenix Sun. He wanted to be in Phoenix. And I guess he openly even said on social media that to not have, I think it was the Rockets at the time, or maybe no, it was New Orleans. It was New Orleans at the time. He didn't want them to match the offer sheet. He wanted to go to Phoenix, and they I guess did away with that, and they matched it anyways. And I guess recently when Eric Gordon went back to Phoenix, they rolled out the red carpet for him. They had cutouts of him in the Phoenix jersey swaps, and basically veteran player to help this championship team and stuff like that. So I think he really wanted to be there, and I think that helped the Suns obviously get him for a really good price. And just adding his shooting and his veteran abilities, I guess, is just an insane pickup.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I didn't know all that about him about 10 years ago. That's pretty interesting. If I would have known that, then I probably would have, made a little bit more of a prediction for it. But yeah, no, they're adding a great veteran player here. 37% career three-point shooter, 16 point per game average. They're not getting that version of him anymore, but he'll provide a lot of three-point shooting, stability off their bench, which I imagine they'll have to do. They can't go that shooting guard heavy in their lineup already with Beal and Booker, and I don't even know if they'll run a pure point guard or if they'll let Devin Booker do that. But yeah, Eric Gordon, he'll be a great weapon for them off the bench. Same with a few of the other guys I mentioned before. But getting back to their starting lineup here, it will be really interesting to watch how they make that work. Will Devin Booker be their primary point guard? We've seen a little bit of that throughout last year when Chris Paul was hurt during the playoffs, and then throughout the year as well. Or will they put Cameron Payne in there, but then it would really make their lineup small? I think that'll be really interesting to watch, not only on offense, but then defense too. That's a whole nother conversation, but purely from an offensive standpoint here, I don't know if that's going to work. It'll take some time. Kevin Durant can work pretty much with anyone, but between that Booker and Beal and DeAndre Ayton dynamic, I think it's going to be tough.
I almost think, kind of back to the starting, like you said, I think that they'll probably try and do some experimenting for a little bit. I'd say at least probably a good 20 games. But I could see them doing Devin Booker at the point, just letting him kind of run it, and then do like a Bradley Beal, a Kogi, even have him just for a little bit extra defense, Kevin Durant and Ayton. I can see that lineup. I could also see the Cameron Payne and then move Booker down, obviously. But I don't really know. I don't really know what would work the best. Obviously, no one does until we get to it. But I would probably run Devin Booker and then Beal, and then obviously bring like Eric Gordon off the bench.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know for sure what it's going to be like. Another thing to think about here is that they hired Frank Vogel, a very defensive-minded coach, and coming from a Lakers fan, a guy who ran a very simplistic offense. So knowing that, he's definitely going to put a priority on defense here. But that kind of raises the question of who do they even really have to put in there? They don't have a whole lot of defenders in their team. I thought they would for sure bring back Torrey Craig. They had his bird rights to bring him back with, but they let him walk to Chicago, and now they really don't have a dynamic lockdown wing defender. So does Frank Vogel believe that Devin Booker can be that for them? And then again, will he be their point guard as well? It's going to be interesting to watch what he does with that. I mean, he's made some comments about getting DeAndre Ayton back to that rim protector, defensive anchor that he was for them during their playoff run, but that's another interesting aspect here. How is Frank Vogel going to run their team?
Well, I'd say he could be a lot more comfortable, especially since Booker's kind of stepped into that more defensive role last season. And it was pretty obvious. You could see him kind of stepping it up a little bit, especially in the playoffs. You could see it, and it's tough. I mean, when you're a primary offensive threat, and then you have to go and play super hard on both sides. I mean, that's hard for any player to do. That's why you have a lot of teams that have their defensive specialists and then your offensive scorers. It's hard to do both.
Yep.
And I think a really unnoticeable pickup that people are kind of failing to realize in Jordan Goodwin that they got in that Beal trade for practically nothing. I mean, Jordan Goodwin's a potential huge role player, especially on defense, with that 6'3", 6'10" wingspan. And yeah, he definitely helps with that lacking department there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I liked Okogie for them off the bench for a little added defense, but Goodwin, I cannot believe Washington threw him in for nothing. He looked really good for them last year. Very underrated player. He's not getting talked about, obviously. He's not a big name. He won't get the, whole conversation points on Twitter about him, but he could be a real energizer bunny for them off the bench. He can provide points, he's a pretty good playmaker, and then that defensive mindset, that'll be great for them. I mean, he won't enter their starting lineup or anything, I can't imagine. I mean, actually, I wouldn't doubt it with Frank Vogel. Like, about halfway through the year, if he's fed up with their point of attack defense.
Let's try it.
Yeah, throw in Goodwin, maybe Okogie. Like, I'm not even kidding here, I wouldn't doubt it. He loved Avery Bradley on the Lakers back in the day.
Yeah, he did.
To a heavy degree, we'll say that much. But yeah,
I think that
go ahead.
Not to interrupt you, just real quick before I lose this thought, I guess, but I think that one thing that's going to be to Jordan Goodwin's advantage for sure with this team is when you watched him on Washington last year, like, he wasn't the best shooter. His efficiency overall, like field goal, 3-point, free throw, it was mediocre to maybe subpar for people that are point guards, but he's really good at that drive and kick offense. He's really good at driving, getting to the rim, finishing around the rim, 70% finishing around the rim, by the way. He's got a really good floater game, and he's really good at kicking. So to me, it's almost like, you can't compare him obviously to Chris Paul, of course, but he's a little bit bigger, obviously, a lot lengthier, and he can drive in, kick out to this team that has super lethal shooters from the three, especially if he's in that second unit with Eric Gordon again. I mean, that drive and kick, that's just, and Bates Diop too, if they actually give him some time too. It's just, I think that's going to be especially to his advantage on both sides,
I mean, I didn't get to watch a whole lot of Jordan Goodwin. I watched a lot of his defensive tape. Offensively, is kind of a bit of an unknown. He is still pretty young yet, 24, a little bit older for a second-year guy, but I think he's got more potential to tap into offensively. And whether they use him in a little bit of a secondary playmaker role like you referred to before, or kind of just a pure energy guy at the bench, it'll be interesting to watch that with Frank Vogel. But kind of, I want to get back to their starting lineup here. Who will actually be their fifth guy? I'll take your thoughts on that here in a minute, but you mentioned Keita Bates-Diop. I don't think he would be a horrible option for it at this point. Another guy who's not talked about pretty much ever, but if they're going to make Devin Booker their point guard, which I kind of would be an advocate for at this point, because Cameron Payne wouldn't fill a huge role for them in their starting lineup with Beal and Booker and KD all needing the ball. I think you got to put the ball in their hands and make one of them kind of the primary setup guy to begin with, which will be Booker. And then if you throw a kind of an off-ball guy who can add more defense to their lineup with Keita Bates-Diop, or maybe even Yuta Watanabe, I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't have a clear choice, and honestly the Suns might not have one either. With how injury-prone Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant have been lately, they may just run a different matchup-based lineup depending on who they play every single night, you know? And I think that the Phoenix Suns for sure are putting together a win-now roster. And when it comes to comparing them to the Denver Nuggets, which is who you have to compare them against, obviously, the reigning champs, I would argue that they are close to having the same depth, if not having more depth than the Denver Nuggets right now, especially with Bruce Brown gone.
Yeah, I think they have a pretty good argument for it at this point. I feel like they're kind of counteracting the dynamic offense that the Nuggets have. My worry for them will be if they have the defense to match up with Denver. They're putting a lot on DeAndre Ayton. I don't know if they'll keep him throughout the whole year here. It's going to be a trial by combat to kind of throw him in the fire here again. You know, Monty Williams and DeAndre Ayton, they did not see eye to eye clearly. I don't know if Frank Vogel will be able to get through to him, but in order for the Phoenix Suns to make a deep playoff run here, obviously it's a lot going to depend on how Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, and Kevin Durant mesh, but DeAndre Ayton will really be that final piece for them, his performance. How far can his defense take them? Without it, I don't know if I believe they can make a true NBA Finals run.